Hey there guys, we're taking a look at Lost Ark running on the AMD Ryzen 5 5500U. Now this is currently running at 1080p with the lowest possible settings, but this time we are using the DirectX 11 API. Now the performance here is honestly surprisingly good. Really the big deal here is the fact that the 1% lows and the averages are pretty close in line, and those frame times are pretty consistent. They are, like spiking up and down, but the actual millisecond difference isn't that significant and it is consistent. And that's really what you want the most out of your frame times. They're going to be moving like this. You want them to be moving like this all the time, because if they're not, that's when the inconsistencies happen. You'll see there where there was a lag spike there. You'll see that the frame times jump all over the place like that, and that's usually where performance issues come in. And 1080p is just really at the border of being playable here. DirectX 9 will net you a little bit of like reduction in CPU usage most of all, so it really is kind of irrelevant here, because if you look at our CPU usage here, it is nothing compared to how bad it was on the 1135 G7. And part of it has to do with the area that we're in on the map. It wasn't that demanding, but it also has to do with the fact that we are just not running into a CPU limit anymore. The DirectX 9 would actually provide us worse performance. And the reason for that is that DirectX 11, its big thing is that it just does more draw calls to the CPU. So the CPU is more involved in the rendering process than in DirectX 9. So when you're in a CPU limited scenario like we were with the 1135 G7, DirectX 9 will actually provide an improvement in performance because the CPU isn't as overwhelmed all the time as it was there. Here, the CPU is never overwhelmed. So because of that, DirectX 9 would actually directly affect the performance because of the fact that we now will have less draw calls to make. So the GPU rather will be waiting on the CPU a lot more. So that will actually affect performance. But DirectX 11, you can clearly see, is still just not there 100%, specifically in things like cutscenes and stuff like that. It will be inconsistent performance. Now, being a cutscene, you don't really play it, so it doesn't matter necessarily too much. But again, if you're somebody that cares about the story, then having, the FPS jump all over the place and suddenly have stutters and stuff like that in cutscenes can be pretty annoying. But really where the good performance actually starts to come in is when we drop things down to 720p. We keep all of the same low settings and we keep the DirectX 11 API, and the performance here is pretty solid. We're getting a pretty much consistent 60 FPS average. 1% lows will dip here and there will be the occasional stutter, but it will be a lot more infrequent. Look at those frame times, by the way. The frame times there show you that this is a pretty good experience. We're going to be having the spikes here and there, but they're not too bad, and overall the experience in the frame times you can see is a lot smoother. The milliseconds is just a lot lower, which is what you want. You want as low of like latency in the frames as possible. So the lower that like your millisecond frame times are, the better. And really this is about as good as it's going to get, and it's a very enjoyable experience. This, I could actually sit and play the game like this. The 1135 G7 really was not a playable experience. This right here, you can get away with playing the entirety of the game like this and not really feel like you're being super held back. Now obviously there's going to be late game stuff where there will be a lot of enemies, a lot of effects. You're doing raids, you're partied up. It is going to get intense, but you have the headroom there where if your FPS drops into the 30 range, or if you just want to lock the game to 30 FPS, you can go right ahead and do that and have a pretty consistent experience. So here you're at least a little bit more flexible in what you can and can't do. Perhaps with a bit more optimization, the game will actually run better here, and I'm hoping that over the next few months that will end up happening and the performance will actually improve in this game, because there is certain aspects of it that still are pretty rough. But I mean, considering how long this game has actually been out, I'm not gonna hold my breath on that. It really seems like that wasn't a main focus over the past few years, but we'll see how it goes. Anyways, I hope you found this video useful. If you did, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.